So, Catherine, we are now, it is 17 years after, or I guess 16 years after 9/11 at this point, plus. 17 years after two suicide bombers killed 17 sailors on the USS Cole. Um, the Guantanamo is still in existence. There were attempts during the Obama administration, um, ostensible attempts to close it. What has happened? Let me just give us a little bit of context and background as to the development of these military commissions. In fact, let's even start with what are military commissions? How are what are happening in Guantanamo Bay different than civilian trials, or I guess, sort of uniform code of military justice trials?
So the military commissions, they originally, a few days after September 11th, President Bush gave an order creating military commissions to try terrorism suspects. Then that order was struck down. There have been a few attempts by Congress to create the system, to change the rules about the system, most recently in 2009. The 2009 law was supposed to make it more like a court-martial or a criminal trial, but the laws are not entirely the same, and I think one of the most salient facts about the military commissions is that the defendants right now in the two capital cases, the September 11th case and the U.S.S. Cole case, were tortured in CIA custody, and the commissions operate in a very restrictive system designed to minimize the amount of classified evidence that the defense has access to. There are also some looser rules about hearsay than military commissions, than ordinary court-martials. And fundamentally, it's a court system that's sort of made up for trying these specific suspects. And so it's faced all kinds of legal challenges. Several of the convictions that have happened have gotten thrown out on appeal because the courts found that you couldn't actually try someone for conspiracy, for example, in a military commission. And so particularly in the death penalty cases, and which have been the cases involving CIA torture victims, there's just been delay after delay, and I think that concealing evidence of the defendant's torture has sort of taken precedence over having anything resembling a speedy trial.
So, okay, so let me see if I can understand this. Because there's a quality to this of I don't know. As you're explaining it, that it is reminiscent to me of an original lie, and then you have to continue to sort of like justify that lie, so it forces a bunch of other lies. Like, I'm not trying to and I'm really talking more about that dynamic. I'm not trying to make a value judgment here, although I'm perfectly willing to. But I'm just trying to see that dynamic, if that's what you're saying has been broadly conceptually happening, that the process, the weight of attempting to deal with this sort of elephant in the room, if you will,
mm-hmm.
of evidence that has been gained through illicit means, and the commissions are trying to construct themselves around this sort of like big elephant in the room, and it is beginning to stress the structure and the undergirding of this structure.
Yeah, except I wouldn't say beginning to stress, but things did come to a crisis in the al-Nashiri case recently.
All right, tell us about that case, and then tell us why that came to a head.
So al-Nashiri is accused of being the mastermind of the U.S.S. Cole bombing, and his his attorneys, so as the piece details, there have been concerns for years from military commissions attorneys that their communications with their clients were not secure. His attorneys recently received information that's still classified that made these concerns much more urgent, and then the prosecution has previously said that the communications are secure and no one in the U.S. government is listening. More recently, though, they haven't said no one is. They've said that the prosecution isn't listening, the military guards aren't listening, no one in law enforcement is listening, and then conspicuously absent from that list of people who aren't listening is the intelligence community. And then on approximately September 20th, the military judge made a classified ruling that said that as long as the prosecution itself isn't listening in, it doesn't, then your attorney-client privilege is not being violated. And so that left the lawyers in the case with no clear way to get whatever eavesdropping they thought was going on to stop. And so they resigned. And it's a death penalty case. Under the 2009 law, there's supposed to be death penalty qualified counsel, but that lawyer has resigned, and the judge tried to order the chief defense counsel to order the death penalty lawyers to come back. The chief defense counsel said no, he wouldn't do that. He got held in contempt of court by the judge and subject to detention in Guantanamo, though not the prison where detainees are held. He was sentenced to several weeks confinement in the trailer where he stays during the war court, though he was actually then released a few days later. But the Pentagon has upheld his conviction.
I mean, obviously, I've read your piece, but for people who have not heard this story, it sounds, and I have to say the first time I read it, it sounds just nuts. I mean, is there any, all right, we have to take a break here. When we come back, I want to ask you a couple of things as to whether or not there is a precedent in I guess, and I don't know if there's a whole sort of body of military commission law or if it runs parallel or just sort of like sprouts off at one point from criminal law, but a precedent to the idea that it's not so much that you have attorney-client privilege, it's that it really depends on who from the government is listening in. And then this idea that they are sending lawyers, military lawyers, to prison because they won't go ahead with this incredible miscarriage of justice from their perspective. It is crazy. And I'm sure there's a more sophisticated word for that, but I can't come up with it. We've got to take a quick break. I'll be right back with Katherine Hawkins on the secret ruling that broke the Guantanamo military commissions. We'll be right back. Ring of Fire Radio.